Hey folks, good morning from Gipley's Garage. It's December 8th, about 52 degrees outside and raining, or at least wet. It'll probably be raining soon. It's been raining all weekend. It's Sunday, so I figured today would be a good time to catch up on some overdue garage work. So I need to change the oil in my lawnmower, change the blades, do all that good stuff. But as I was out here, I was moving my KTM 1290 out of the way and noticed I had some oil underneath. So unfortunately, my rear shock is blown, and that's what's going to be today's primary task, is removing the shock. I've already talked to KTM of North Texas. They can rebuild it. They quoted me around $150 for the labor and materials. They've got the rebuild kit on the way. I've done front forks a million times, and that's no big deal. But I haven't really done any rear shocks, and plus on top of that, I think it is nitrogen charged, so I'd probably have to have some professional help anyway. So I guess with that, let's take a look at what we're doing. So this is my 2016 1290 Super Adventure. Like I mentioned, the rear shock is gone. I've actually got it on the rack right now. I'm going to move it down here to the concrete before we dive in, because I don't want my rack held up maybe a week or so before I can get the shock rebuilt. But I'll try to zoom in here and actually walk in here. Not sure how much you can see. So this is the 1290. This is the servo that does the preload. It's like a semi-electronic, I guess is how you would call it. Let's see if I can get a better picture over here. But you can't really see now, but on the swing arm, there's a bunch of oil that's dried up now, and I don't think the lighting's good, but you can actually see oil in there, like on the bottom, I guess the spring catch, or the spring disc, whatever you want to call it, but it's definitely blown. I noticed on my last couple of rides on this thing, it was getting a little more springy, a lot more rebound than I usually have, so I thought something was up, but I wasn't sure what, because ironically, I had just rebuilt the front forks within the last 500 or 600 miles, so I was kind of thinking, okay, maybe something's going on with the front forks. But then when I saw the oil, I knew what the culprit was. So this bike has right at a little over 25,000 miles on it. I think it's 25,100, between 100 and 200. I can check later. So the shock lasted a long time. I rebuilt the front forks twice, but this is the first time I've had any issue with the shock. New ones are running right at $1,900 through KTM Parts Pro, so obviously that's not an option, so I'm going to take this one off and try to have it rebuilt, but we'll see where that goes. I don't really have any complaints with the factory suspension, because the type of riding I do, it fits me pretty well. So I'm just going to go back, hopefully with a rebuild with the stock set up, and be good with that for hopefully another 25,000 miles. This bike's been, out of the 25,000 miles on it, is probably 75% off-road. I've done 2 BDRs on this bike, the Colorado and Wyoming BDR. Those were a lot of fun. Other than that, here in Texas, with all the privately owned land, most of my off-roading has been just county roads and things of that nature, just mostly gravel roads and dual track, things like that. I guess we'll go ahead and get started though. So I've got to, I actually was going to start this job yesterday, but I realized I didn't have a 12 millimeter hex bit, which is required to get the bolts out, the mounting bolts for the shock. Also printed out the instructions from the KTM service manual, so we'll see how that goes. Hopefully this cheap Chinese tool will last to remove and replace 2 bolts. I typically don't buy, cheap Chinese tools, but I didn't actually have a 12 millimeter Allen or hex bit. So AutoZone had one. I went up there to buy it. I called up first to make sure they had one, and they did. The 12 millimeter by itself was $15. And when I got there, I noticed this 3-piece kit with a 12, a 14, and a 17 was only 17 bucks. So spent $2 more for some extra cheap Chinese tools. So anyway, hopefully they'll get the job done. Now that I know I need an actual 12 millimeter, I'll be ordering a proto tool from somewhere, probably Zorro. I've had good luck with them in the past, and proto tools are good, made in the USA, high quality. I guess the only other thing I'm going to say before I move this bike off the lift is the one thing I did, and I'm not sure if, the manual didn't say anything about it. But this does have the auto preload. That's what the servo on the other side is for. You know, it doesn't have threads and lock nuts like a traditional shock. It's got the electronic adjustment. So I did go in to the settings, and just to make sure it's not going to be an issue for disassembly. Yeah, 25,107 miles, there it is. I went into my settings, or my load settings, if I can ever get to them. Yeah, there we go. And I moved it to the least amount of preload. And the reason I did that is because when I disassemble this thing, you're not going to be able to adjust it. So with the least amount of preload, it theoretically should be easier to take the spring off. So be sure to do that if you're doing this procedure. That was really the only thing I could think of for front work. I'm hoping I could do all this without taking the rear tire off. We'll kind of figure that out as we go. But I guess I'm about ready to move this down to the concrete to free up my lift. And then I'm going to probably just put it on the center stand, and then we'll be ready for disassembly. Okay, got the bike on the center stand and just realized I had a couple more steps to do before we're ready to remove the shock. So the first is popping off the seat so you can get access to the upper shock bolt. And I just wanted to show, I'm sure most people that own one of these already know, this is the KTM Parts Pro one-piece seat, or the KTM one-piece seat. I think stock they had a two-piece seat, but these are heated, so there are two connectors, the rider and the passenger, so I'll need to disconnect those to take the seat off. They're just click connectors, so no big deal. But taking the seat off is so you can access this bolt here to get this cover out of the way, and then right in that hole there, I believe, is where the shock mounts. That's what it looks like, so I'll have to access that. So I'm hoping I can just take this bolt loose and slide this out of the way. I'm not sure how the front attaches. The other thing I found that we're probably going to need to do to get access is for removal. We can get the bolts out, but to remove the shock, I'm going to have to take this mud guard or the splash cover off. And it looks like I can do that without removing the wheel, because there's two, it's kind of hard to see, but there's two bolts holding it on. So hopefully we'll be able to do all that without issue. And we'll see how that goes and be back when those are off and we're ready to remove the shock. Okay, so you can see I got the seat off now. I've slid this heat cover up out of the way, so now we can access the upper shock bolt. The lower's down here in the swing arm, so we've already got access to that. So now, excuse me, I've already taken the, hit my lift there. I've already taken the one bolt out on the mud guard and fixing to remove the other one. Just wanted to illustrate where those two were. These are actually Torx 27. The heat shield bolt was a Torx 30. So let's see if I can, kind of hard to see here, but yeah, this should be the last one. I got my headlight on, so that's why the light is changing, but it's probably messing up my picture here, but this will come out. Let's see. Probably turn it by hand easier now. Okay, there we go. It's definitely coming out, but there we go. Oops, all right. So there we go. You got access now to the rear shock. Here's the mud guard. All right, actually found the screw, which is rare because that's usually the first rule of mechanics, is anything you drop will never reach the floor. But anyway, yeah, so there's the mud guard. That's what the screw looks like. I actually got all the screws over here, and they look the same, but this one is slightly different. That's the one that goes into the this little side piece right here to hold the mud guard on, or excuse me, the heat guard on. All right, ready to try to take the shock out. Okay, one final step before we take the bolts out and remove the shock is we have to undo the electrical connectors. You can see at the rear, I think you can see, let's see. Yeah, there's the one at the rear of the shock, so that's the bottom connector for, I would assume, the damping settings. And then there's also another one I refer to it as a servo drive. It's basically just a motor that, you know, adjusts the preload. But here's the motor, and if you look up top, actually you can see there's the cable coming off of it right there. And if you follow it up top, it appears to be this connector right here. So essentially the first connector to the left of your ground cable right there. So we'll try to finagle those loose. Sometimes they're stubborn, and then we'll be ready to take the shock bolts out and remove the shock. Okay, so I got the top connector undone. I just wanted to show everybody what that looked like. It was kind of a pain in the ass. It's kind of misleading too, because this is the female end that goes in the male end. The male end's towards the rear, so you have to push down on this little prong here. I used a screwdriver to do it, but the other thing is I had to kind of lift it up out of its cradle. There's a little, it's kind of hard to see, but a plastic kind of U-shaped channel that it snaps into where it won't move, and I had to actually pull it up a little bit. You got to be real careful, because the way these are wired, they left real like zero slack on anything, so you want to be careful and not break a wire or anything. But that's what worked for me, pulling it up out of the cradle. I just pried it up with a screwdriver, and then I was able to get enough leverage to push this pin. You can kind of see how it works right there, not the pin but the clicker, and remove that cable. So now we'll have to, you know, fish it back down through here, which will be a little bit of a challenge, and then we'll try to get the bottom one down there. At least it's out in the open, so hopefully it'll be a little easier. Okay, I got the rear connector off. It was a little bit of a pain in the ass because it's kind of restricted to reach to, but the one thing I wanted to point out is, if you can kind of see the little nipple on the connector there and how that goes on. So when you take the connector off, you've got to press at the rear of the connector back here. I know it's kind of hard to see, and these things are kind of fragile. You don't want to put too much pressure on them. But anyway, as you can see, like I said, there's a little barb here or nipple that it clicks onto. So you have to press right back here on the back of the connector. Not sure if you can see that too good. And so just be careful and don't break that, because it's probably the most fragile part of the shock. All right, we're going to use our cheap AutoZone Chinese-made tool, 12mm, to get in here and see if we can take the shock bolt loose. I already broke it loose a minute ago, so these are only torqued to like 80 foot-pounds, I believe, so not very tight. All right, that feels pretty loose. Okay, so there's the bolt that we just removed. That in there. And obviously the swing arm is still off the ground. I think there is a centering bushing. It's kind of hard to see from here, and that may have us caught, but we'll take a closer look and see what we can see here. Okay, so kind of hard to see, but I think the shock is just kind of wedged in here into the swing arm mount. So I grabbed a screwdriver, and I'm just going to gently pry it and see if we can get the swing arm loose. I don't want to put too much pressure on it. At least make sure I'm on the shock itself and nothing. Yes. There we go. Okay. So it's just about to break free. I think. Okay, yeah, so my swing arm is all the way on the ground now, so I just got to break this loose. I may have to get something with a little more leverage. The screwdriver is not quite long enough. Okay, so I've got it free now. Kind of hard to see. What I ended up having to do, like I said, that screwdriver was too long to get leverage from above, so I came in from the bottom. I actually used this kind of funky looking piece of metal. It's from my smoker for moving the grate, but I was able to stick it up under here and get behind the shock, you know, and leverage it out that way. It's not in there very tight, but it was more than I could move by hand. So I guess the key here is this would probably be a lot easier with the tire off. but I'm not into doing extra work if there's no benefit. So whatever you can fit to squeeze in between the, let's see, the lower shock mount here to just kind of wedge it out, then you're golden. So okay, the only thing we got left is this upper shock mount, and then we should be able to get it out. However, I just discovered a nice little problem on my cheap Chinese tool. So you see this tool is not very long, and I can't get the socket into the frame to reach the hex head. So I may have to, I'm gonna order a longer one for a long-term solution, but I'm gonna see if I can come up with something to make this work. So we'll check that out and be back. Okay, so here's my temporary fix until I can get a longer 12mm hex bit. I pressed the bit out of this Duralast tool. That's what it looks like. And then I found that it fits a 14mm 3/8 socket. And with that, I can actually get in to remove the upper shock bolt. So we're going to do that. Okay, so I was able to use my modified tool to get the upper shock bolt out. And now we probably may have to finagle the shock a little bit. I'm not sure if it's got a bushing in it or what, but it's not dropping. So I don't want to bang it up too much. I'm sure something is holding it. So we'll figure that out and get it removed. Okay, so finally got the shock loose from the top mount. It wasn't very difficult. All I had to do was wiggle it a little bit from side to side. The bushing is just, I guess, you know, super tight into the mounting there. So I don't know how heavy this thing is. Let's see if we can get it out. You're supposed to be able to remove this. Yeah, it is going to be removable here. Let's see. Try to do this without scratching anything up. Yep. Okay, so there it is. We got it removed. Set it down so we can take a look here. Yeah, obviously you can see all the lifeblood there coming out, the hydraulic oil. Like I said, I don't know much about these particular shocks. I haven't rebuilt them. I've changed springs on my 690, which was pretty straightforward. This is the 1290 Super Adventure 2016 model. So back then it wasn't an S or a R. It was just a 1290. It was only model. A lot of people call them the SAT for touring because it had the large tank. But it does have this motor on it for the preload adjustment. Like I said, before I took this off, I adjusted it all the way to the lowest setting where the spring's got the least amount of tension on it. Looks like just a standard shock in terms of clamping and taking this end plate off to get the spring off of it. So I'm sure KTM in North Texas has all the equipment to do that. And again, this one has the electronic damping feature, so you know, not really familiar with all that. But anyway, that is the removal. And hopefully the rebuild kit will come in later this week where we can carry this thing down to, or carry the shock rather, to KTM in North Texas and get it rebuilt. And then I'll probably do another video of the reinstallation. But that's pretty much it. Pretty straightforward. The one thing I will say is kind of hard to see, but there are bushings inside this swing arm mounting location. I think the same way on the top. And I did read something in the procedure about coming up with a threaded rod and some collar nuts to kind of get that bushing back into the swing arm so you can install the shock without interference, and then it all tightens down. So I'll have to research that a little bit. But anyway, didn't take too long. If I wasn't filming this operation, I would say this could probably be done in 30 minutes or so, especially now that I semi know what I'm doing. This is the first time I've ever removed it. So yeah, not very big task at all, especially with the bike having the center stand. That makes it easy where you don't need a lift or anything. Probably would have been easier to work here on the lift, but again, I just didn't want to tie mine up in case I got to work on something else before I get this thing back together. So anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and like I said, hopefully we'll have a follow-up video putting this thing back in. I just hope I can get it rebuilt quickly and get it back together. Even though I'm not riding right now, I still hate having my stuff down and unavailable. So we'll see how it goes. Thanks for watching. Bye. Hey folks, we are back, ready to assemble the shock and put it back into the KTM 1290. It's been a minute. I think I did the removal back in December, like December 8th, I think, is when we shot the first video. Today is February 22nd, and it's about 35 degrees out here in the shop, so definitely cool this morning. But regardless, I finally got all my parts in to put my shock back together and get the KTM 1290 back on the road. So figured I'd do a quick update on that, show you where we are, try to get the shock assembled and installed today. So where we left off previously, I had just removed the shock and I was going to try to get it rebuilt at KTM of North Texas. I had talked to those guys and they said they could get a rebuild kit. Well, after the fact, they called me back and said, hey, we looked into it and all we can get is certain parts for this thing. So there wasn't really a rebuild procedure that KTM of North Texas had. So I spent a lot of time on advrider.com. My username on there is just Gimply without the garage. But anyway, there's a wealth of information there, specifically in the Orange Crush thread where people discuss their KTMs. So one of the inmates there, Hoss1, Hoss1, he's done a lot of modifications on his shock, and he turned me on to a company called Suspension 101 that is out in California, and the owner George does rebuild these SAT shocks. So anyway, I sent the shock out to George. He disassembled it, and unfortunately he called me back and said, hey man, this thing is too screwed up to rebuild, and I got him to package it up and send it back to me, and he was absolutely correct. So we'll take a look here on the monoshock. You can see, hopefully you can see, it's kind of hard for me to tell on the GoPro, but that's cracked right there. You know, the dampening up here was screwed up. Here's the bottom half of the shock, and you can see it just really pounded the hell out of the needle in there. There was a bunch of metal to metal contact. So essentially this thing is toast. Let's see if I can push this piston down. Should have done that before. Not sure how much you can see, but there was a lot of metal to metal contact in here. Having a hard time pressing it down. I've got some pictures I can post up, but this thing is just really destroyed. All the internals and the metal was just shot, so there's nothing you can do there. But you know, obviously the preload adjuster came off. There's the stock spring. There's the what do you call that? The spring stop, I guess. But anyway, so I found out some more information from advrider.com. First thing I did is okay, I've got to have a new monoshock. So I started looking at that, and looking at these assemblies stateside, I got prices everywhere from $1,200 to $1,500, which to put it mildly, that sucks. But you know, I don't want to keep my bike down, so I was getting ready to order that. And then further research on ADVrider, I found a European parts supply place called motorcyclespareparts.eu. And actually inmate SRT IE4K was the one that had posted that info online. So, you know, obviously I'm getting this information from advrider.com. So again, you know, hat tip to them for providing that. So based off that, I went over to that site and checked the price on the monoshock. This is the WP stock monoshock with the electronic adjustment that comes on the 2016 1290 SAT. Ordered this from Motorcycle ECU, and I think the total out the door was I can't remember exactly, but it was in the 400 range, like maybe 420, 407, something like that. So essentially ordering this from Europe got it to my door for approximately $800, you know, $800 cheaper than I could buy it stateside. So I bought the new monoshock, and I've got the little washer kit that goes with it, you know, one here and two down here. So got that part taken care of. Well, while I had the bike off, I had done some research on the spring, and you know, obviously the stock spring is fairly soft. This is a what was it, like a 16 kg per millimeter spring, I think, which is the equivalent of 914 pounds per inch. So, you know, I'd never really had an issue with the stock spring because I'm not doing a lot of technical stuff. I'm just kind of hitting fire roads and things like that. So I decided to upsize the shock while I had it apart, and I was going to have to put it back together anyway. So I started looking into shocks, and there was a couple that Slavens Racing had. They weren't really for this bike. They were more for the 1290S or the 1290R. So talking to Hoss One again online, he turned me on to a company called Cannon Racecraft, and they're in Oklahoma City, and they basically make custom springs. So I calculated the rate I thought I would need, and I ordered the appropriate spring, and it just came in this week. So what I did, I went from this stock 914 inch-pound spring to this progressive spring, so hopefully you can see the coils are a little closer wound at the bottom, which will end up being on the top when I assemble it. But regardless, this new spring, if you can see the wire size, let me see if I can bring that in. Obviously the wire size on the spring is a lot thicker, and this progressive spring is 19 to 25 kg per millimeter, and I think in inch that translates to like 1,042 pounds per inch up to 1,400 pounds per inch. Hopefully I'm saying that correct. I'm not really a suspension guy, but just starting to dabble a little bit. But regardless, the calculated weight for my nominal load, I weigh 250 pounds. I've got Jesse's on the bike, which weigh about 40 pounds. I've got my tank bag, which I carry a little gear in. I've got tools. I've got my boots. I've got all my riding gear, etc. I came up with a nominal load of 323 pounds with me on the bike. And the calculations say I need about 1,380 pounds per inch of spring. So I figured this 19 to 25 kg per millimeter, or what did I say before, 1042 to 1,400 pound spring, was going to be the sweet spot. So I guess we're getting ready to find out, because I'm going to try to assemble it today and get it back on the bike. I think the high today is maybe 50, so it would definitely be rideable this afternoon if I can get it done in time. If not, we'll probably go out tomorrow. I think it's supposed to be in the high 50s or 60s tomorrow. Regardless, that's where we are today. I've got to get this thing compressed. I do have a press here, but I don't have the right gear to put on the spring. So I went to my Handy Lowe's hardware and picked up 7/16 bolt and a couple of these turnbuckles with an eye bolt and a hook on it. So my idea is to put the bolt through the monoshock here, and then use one of the hooks to turnbuckle it in and compress the spring enough to get the collar on. So that's where we are. I'm going to try to get that set up, and we'll be back and see how it works. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention before assembly, and I wanted to point this out, is that the stock spring has an overall length of 198.5 millimeters, and the spring I ordered has a overall length of 200 millimeters, and also, just for informational purposes, the ID is 59 millimeters, so that's what you want to go around the monoshock. So what I found out from researching online is that KTM really intended for these springs to be 200 millimeter. That's why I ordered mine at 200 millimeter overall length. The story I heard was that KTM had issues maintaining 200 millimeters exactly from their supplier, so they went to the shorter spring of 198.5, where they could use these shims to get it up to 200. And that way they could control the, I guess the preload on the shock. So what I have done, like I said, I ordered a shim kit with my new monoshock. I've already put there's an upper one for the collar. This is the old one. I've already installed that on the preload adjuster. And then the two that came with it, it's kind of hard to see, but they are different thicknesses. So one of them's about 4 millimeter, the other one's about 1.8. I think I'd have to measure it again, but I'm going to leave the thick one out and only go with the thin one in this application, because measuring these measured a little over 3, and I'm sure they've compressed a little bit. So if you do the 3 plus the 198.5, it's at 203. Around 201 millimeters, and with mine being already 200 millimeters, I'm going to add the 2 in here, and that'll get it to about 202. So we'll be within 1 millimeter. So I'll have slightly, just a very slight more preload on that from the regular setting, but I think that's the way to go. And then plus with having this one, thin shim in here, it still keeps the spring off the metal, which I don't know that really matters in this application. But anyway, that's another thing I wanted to point out. Again, thanks to the folks at ADV Rider for providing all that information. And yeah, so we'll get it back assembled and on the bike. All right, got the GoPro set up, so let's see what'll work, and hopefully all this will work. So sorry for the noise. I had to cut my space heater on because it's freezing out here to me. I'm sure our friends up north can handle it, but this southern boy can't, so I had to get my little space heater out to keep my hands warm. So essentially, this is the monoshock. We talked about it earlier. Got it from Motorcycle Spare Parts over in Europe. Got here fairly quick, so I was real pleased with that. So the first part of the assembly is this is the preload adjuster. I've already got my collar on here. Don't forget to put that on. And this simply slips over the bottom of the monoshock like this. So we'll put that on there. I've heard these things get hung up real bad after being on for a while. Luckily mine came loose, but again, that was George at Suspension 101 that disassembled it for me. There's a little screw here that goes in this notch, so make sure you line that up. And that's essentially all there is for installing the preload adjuster. It just sits there, and of course this collar keeps it from sliding around. So the next thing is the actual spring. For me, since this is a progressive spring, you can kind of see the coils are closer together up here. Personally, I don't think it makes a difference which way you mount it. I'm going to mount it with the tighter wound springs to the top, just because you can't really see the top on the bike, and then aesthetically it'll be even spacing down here. But you know, in the real world, I don't think it really makes any difference. I'm just putting it on that way for my preference. So again, this just slides over the bottom. And we'll engage with the collar here on the preload adjuster. So obviously the issue is you have to compress this spring enough, hopefully you can see that there, to get the collar on, the lower collar on, to hold the spring in place. So that's what we're going to try to do now, and this is where I'm kind of getting into territory that I'm not sure if it's going to work or not. So essentially I bought these turnbuckles from Lowe's, and 7/16 bolt. So I'm getting ready to put that on the top spring here, or the top mounting bolt, and I got a flat washer to keep things from bouncing off, so we'll see how that goes. Hopefully this will work. Again, I'm not sure. Uh-oh, that nut doesn't want, there it goes. Threads are a little jacked, probably on the nut. Okay, there we go. All right, so I got that on. Oh, you know what, I already did something wrong. I got to put the turnbuckles on first before I put this in here. I forgot, because I got eye bolts on one side. So I got one there, one here, and then I can put the bolt up. All right, I'll get it right one of these years. Go through the yoke, or the mounting bolt, mounting hole, then put the nut on. Okay, so we kind of got to set up like this, and I'll get my cable out of the way here. So what my thought is, I want to hook it up here, because you can't hook on the bottom, obviously. Can you see that? Let's see. Yeah, obviously can't hook on the bottom because that's got to be free. So I'm going to try to lengthen this enough to get on this one of these bottom bolts here. Actually, I may go, yeah, I'm going to have to go down here. So we'll see how that works. Hopefully that's going to grab. It looks kind of iffy at the moment, but let me get us adjusted here and we'll see what happens. It looks like, obviously this is hitting the spring here, so it's kind of hard to turn. If I was smart, I would probably put some tape on the spring to keep it from marking it up, but since this bike is an off-road beast, I'm not really worried about aesthetics. Yeah, so it's already starting to compress a little bit here, so hopefully this is going to work. It is eating into my spring a little bit. I probably, like I said, I wish I would have put some tape on it, but already going for it now, so let's see what happens. Well, on a good note, this wrench turning workout has kind of warmed the temperature up for me internally a little bit. All right, let's see where we are now. Still not quite there. Got about a quarter inch or so to go. Oh, shit. Slipped off. That's not good. Son of a bitch. Oh, it actually bent. Look, it bent the hook there. All right, well, back to the drawing board on this, I guess. Okay, here's plan B, which quite honestly I should have done in the first fucking place, but this is my press. I just bought this thing a few weeks ago because I was putting new crank bearings into this ride over here. This is Ethel, my 05 Softail. Regardless, The reason I did not use the press and I used the, turnbuckle screw setup was because I didn't have a plate the right size for the spring down here, so I had to use these thick plates. I was able to compress it enough. I've got the collar on now and the little shim, and I'm going to release the press. The problem is I hope these plates are far enough back where the collar won't hit those before it hits the spring. So we'll try that and see how it works. Hopefully it'll work okay. If not, maybe I can finagle it into place. But obviously this is a 12-ton spring, excuse me, 12-ton press. This is a El Cheapo from Northern Tool. I think I paid about 140 bucks for it. I hated to pay that much for a tool to use one time, so I guess now I'm using it 2 times, so that's great. It cut my cost down to, $70 per use instead of 140. Regardless, I'm going to take this pressure off and see how this works. Hopefully no explosions, and we'll be good to go. So I'm out here filming by myself. I don't have a tripod, so I'm going to cut this off while I do this maneuver, and then hopefully when I come back, we'll have a fully assembled rear shock. All right, we are back with the fully assembled shock. I got it all put together using the press. That's what I should have done to start with. Like I said, I just didn't think I had a plate that would allow me to slide this collar on. But kind of one of the things with this new spring, it has a larger, even though the ID is the same, this wire is bigger than the old spring, so it sticks out a little further over the collar. So that allowed me to do it with the press. Again, I should have done that first instead of trying the turnbuckle idea. That was a big fail. And I've got my dumbass marks to show for it. These scratches here, as I like to refer to them, dumbass marks. That's where the turnbuckle got into the powder coat while I was trying to turn it on. Same over here, so I don't think that's a big deal. Can't really see it, and this bike is not for looks anyway. It's all go and no show. All adventure bikes are historically ugly, compared to something like that right there or that over there. So not really worried about it. I wish I wouldn't have scratched it. If I would have used the press, it wouldn't have got scratched, but it's neither here nor there. I'll keep an eye on it, and if I see any surface rust, I'll just touch it up with something, but I don't think it's going to be an issue. Anyway, just looking at the new shock, like I said, we shimmed it, so we got the same overall height of about 201, 203 millimeters, something like that. It's definitely beefier. You can see, again, the wire size is a lot larger than the stock one, and that's why you got a little bit of, overhang there. So I guess next thing is to put it back on the bike. So I got to move the seat out of the way. I just kind of stored everything on the bike here. It's only a few screws. There's the 2 shock bolts. I looked at replacing them, but they weren't bent at all, so I didn't do anything with that. So I got to put the shock on, the shock bolts, hook the connectors up, and put the mud guard back on the rear. So hopefully that'll all go pretty quick, and that will be the next step. All right, so we're getting ready to put the shock back in the bike. Got it all assembled here. So probably going to be kind of hard to do all this and hold the camera at the same time, so I may have to cut it off, but I just wanted to kind of show you what the ingress-egress path is. I'm on the left side of the bike because if you look at the right side, you got the rear brake fluid reservoir right there, so it makes it kind of hard to get in and out of the frame, but you can make it in here. You got to wiggle it around a little bit, which is what I'm fixing to do next, but it will go in and out from the left side of the frame. So let me get that in there and we'll be back. Okay, so I did run into one little roadblock while trying to get the shock mounted. I figured I'd document that and show you, so in case you're doing this, it might make it easier. There's actually a bushing in both the upper and lower fork mount. And when you compress or when you screw in the shock bolt, it kind of squeezes out of the swing arm, and in this case the frame on the upper, and it comes out a little bit. So you can wiggle the shock loose and get it out, but it makes it very hard to put back in. So see if I can get a different angle over here. On the lower shock mount, there you can see the bushing, hopefully, inside the swing arm. I was able to just take a screwdriver and push that back because it's easy access. This upper mount is kind of buried under the wiring harness here. It's part of the frame, it goes across the frame. And this is where the shock mount actually is in here. There's a bolt hole here, and your bolt comes in from this direction. So the bushing was squeezed out towards me, or excuse me, towards the right side of the bike. It's hard to see, but I did find a redeeming value of this 7/16 bolt I bought to try to do my shock installation, which didn't work out. So I took the cover off on this side, and I was able to push this bolt through the hole where the threads are because it was smaller than the shock mount. And then I screwed the nut on the end of it, and I essentially used that as a punch where I could tap it with a hammer, and I drove the bushing back into the left side of the bike. So anyway, if you're trying to fit the shock in and it keeps fighting you back and won't let you in, that's probably what it is. Because those bushings, when you take it out, even though they're the same size as the mount here and the mount here, if they stick out any at all, you're not going to get it in there. So just wanted to share that part. All right, so I got the shock in place. Still got to put the lower bolt in. You can see, hopefully you can see, the mount is not quite lining up with the swing arm, so I've got to raise the rear tire about a ½ inch or so to get that to fit. But I've already got the top bolt in. I haven't torqued it down yet. I'm getting ready to do that. One of the other things I was going to mention in my last installment, you know, I didn't have the right length 12mm bit to get into this hole, which I have now. I bought this from McMaster Car. Not sure if you guys are familiar with them or not. We use them a lot at work. They're basically just a very large parts, I guess you call it parts hardware warehouse, but I found that if I'm buying just a one-off tool, they have stuff that's usually high quality and not that expensive. And if it's something I'm not going to be using on a daily basis, I don't mind doing that. From other stuff, I usually buy Proto tools. They're made in the USA. They're pretty stout, and they're, you know, a lot cheaper than Snap-on. Plus, I'm not a professional shop, so just giving a shout out to McMaster Car for that. You know, any type of hardware, lines, hose, whatever, man, they got it, and usually gets to your door in a couple of days. So real happy with them. So anyway, just wanted to show this progress. I'm gonna cut this off, figure out a way to shim the back tire up where I can get the bottom bolt started. Then I'll torque them down. I think the torque value is 80 Newton meters on these. I'll have to double check that. And then the last part is to hook up the bottom connector, which obviously that's, you know, just right there. So the bottom connector will go there, and then the connector for the preload adjustment is up here. That's actually the seat right there. This is the one for the preload adjuster. So I will have to fish the cable off of the motor up through this spider web, or this nest, and get it plugged in here. So that'll be a little fun. It was last time taking it out. So anyway, I'm gonna get the bottom bolt in, get those torqued down, and then get the wiring harness back on, and then we're almost ready to go. Okay, so got everything buttoned back up, got the seat on, the mud flap back on, so let's take a look. So obviously there she is. You can see the new spring is installed, complete with dumbass marks, and where I scratched it up a little bit. You really can't see, I orientated them front and back. So, but anyway, there's the bottom connector. Hopefully you can see it. Got it plugged back in. Got the mud flap installed here. It's kind of hard to see from the front, but you just got 2 screws holding that in. So got all that done, and then I already put the seat on, but the preload motor already routed the wire up here. You can just kind of barely see it in there, and put it back in the cradle. Put the cover screws back on, and we should be ready to fire up and see what happens. So this thing's been hibernating for a couple months. I've had it on the battery tender, so let's see what, if any, kind of alarm codes we get. Hopefully none. That's a good sign. The old fuel pump's cutting on. We're in neutral, and so notice the preload is set right where I had it at the I put it to the lowest setting, just single person. So let's see if we can adjust it. There's damping is in sport. There's load. I'm gonna go ahead while I'm here and move this down to comfort, which is what I usually ride in. Obviously with the new spring rates, we may have to play with that a little bit. Go back. Alright, there's load. So, oops, sorry. Let's go in here. Alright, I'm going to try to adjust it, and let's see if we can watch while I press the button. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're there. And I did that wrong. Let me go back. Okay, there we go. Now I gotta set it. So let me press the button. Okay. So it's flashing. That means it should be adjusting. got a little over 25,000 miles on it on the original suspension, so finally got the shock sprung to what I think is the right rate. Back up here where you can hear me. The sun actually finally came out today, so luckily we got some sunshine. Might be able to do a test ride later today, but get away from the noise here. But yeah, so really glad to get the bike back on the road, or fixing to be back on the road. Looking forward to trying the new springs, seeing how that feels. You know, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but these springs, to get one custom made is right about $180, or it is $180, and then I paid for expedited shipping, so you know, another 38 or whatever it was on that. I think it got to my door for $218, but hey, you know, if you got the right size spring rate, well worth it. And obviously next time I'll use my press instead of trying to use the old turnbuckle and eye bolt idea. That didn't work out too good, so lesson learned there. Anyway, yeah, that's pretty much it. So glad to get this thing done, and now everything's back on the road, including the old Softail. That was my other project I was just working on, so I keep trying to get back to this, but I just never can find enough hours in the day. But hopefully now that everything is roadworthy, I can jump back on the old shovel head and work on that. So anyway, all is good in KTM land. We're gonna go take the Beast out for a ride, or excuse me, the Alpha out for a ride here in a bit, and see how the spring works.